Okay. Fabulous. And I'll just keep letting people in as they come. In the meantime, I'd like to pass it over to Thayer Thursday, who's going to be moderating this discussion and welcome all of the individual artists and welcome to our community. And thank you so much for being here. I'm also going to be sharing my screen with some images of the show, but I might wait a few minutes to do that just so I can make sure to let everybody in, if that's okay.
Great. Is it all right if I get started, Jessica? Is that cool? All right. Hello, everybody. My name is There. I'm going to moderate this conversation today with this group of very dear people doing a very dear project that has been in continuity for a few years now. I participated as a member last year, but this year I just didn't have time. I'm so glad that I'm able to be here in part of this conversation because this group is so lovely. The group of people and the project itself is so cool. So, for those who don't know, Embodied Material is sort of like part book club, theory club, hangout space, textile creation. It does a lot of things and it holds a lot of people doing a lot of really cool things. But the main premise is that they're all reading really interesting theory texts together. Sometimes it's texts that members bring in as an offering. Other times, like this year, it's one text that they're all reading together, sort of in its entirety. And then they make a textiles show as a response to what they have read and what they've talked about. So it's all the work is extremely juicy and really like kind of full of cool ideas that they've been sharing all year long. So very cool show, very cool project. I first want to just open it up to the group, maybe just one at a time, and for ease of Zoom call, I might just call on y'all's names. If you could just share with the group here listening what your name and pronouns are. Give us like a little bit of a taste of who you are out in the world. So if you want to share any like personal descriptions of what you do in your daytimes or who you are in this world, that would be great. And then maybe just share a little bit of brief context about your piece and what inspired your piece. Um, Maybe we could start with Drew. Would you share, introduce yourself, tell us who you are out in the world, and then some context about your piece and what inspired it?
Sure. My name's Drew Maud Griffin. My pronouns are they, them. I am a trans disabled artist located in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I think context for like my day-to-day life. I am somebody living with chronic illness and live with the illness called ME/CFS. And so I spend a lot of time in bed, which is where I'm tuning in from now and where I made the piece that is in this show. Um, and yeah, I think a lot about the way that disability and transness and queerness all kind of emerge together in my own identity, and then in the way that I guess we kind of look at difference in the world. Um, the piece that I made is called Queer Crip Love, and it's a embroidery of a photo from me and my partner, um, just like embracing and me kissing their hand, and enjoying, just like this trans disabled love that we have together. Um, and I made it because there's this quote from I believe it's like Silas Denver, an artist on Instagram, made this piece that is like, if I cannot find trans joy, I shall create it. And I think we just need a little bit of trans joy right now. And I was experiencing trans joy and I was experiencing trans intimacy, and I'm like, let me meditate on that. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah.
That's beautiful, Drew. Yeah, I think there's been a lot of conversations amongst my circles too of trans people in my life that are very of the mind right now that like we could play out the fantasies of the people trying to oppress us, or we could play out our own fantasies and see what magic lives there. So I think that's a beautiful a beautiful way to make work. Thank you, Drew. I think next, Soph, would you mind sharing who you are, name and pronouns, who you are out in the world, and some context about your piece and what inspired it?
Yes. Hey, I'm Soph, they, them. Um, I kind of planted the seeds for embodied material back in 2023. I received a grant through the Forecast Public Art here in the Twin Cities, and that was a way to, as they're described, read queer theory and textile theory together with a group of artists. Quite a bunch of the artists that started doing that now 3 shows ago. This is our third exhibition, have still been doing it now. So it's felt really rewarding being able to not only challenge my own practice through this project, but be in community with other queer textile artists through this project, and see like the evolution of both our practices alongside each other and our friendships. And I think that ethos is something that I bring into my textile work. I'm very interested in reusing materials not only as a way to describe my own artistic practice, but also to cultivate community. Um, some other recent things I've done out in the world is the Alamhabad Community Quilt Project, which started in response to the October 7th, 2023 atrocities that began this wave of genocide and violence against Palestine. And that has been a quilt project that I've been able to bring to different cities across the US upon its completion. And I also work at a progressive art studio for adults with disabilities. So in my work brain life, I'm often thinking about like how do I what adaptations can I make to tools and my own teaching practice so that it's accessible to people, and like what does that truly mean? Like when I could talk about it forever, but I won't. Anyway, the piece that I made for the show is a little textile book made from scraps of corduroy and some other materials that I could get into later. And a lot of times I like to think of my practice as collaging with textiles. So that's my little book.
Hmm.
And that's it.
Thank you, Soph. It's hard for me not to just jump into the discussion right now because everybody's intros are so juicy. But let's move on to Kelly, please. Would you tell us who you are, what you do, and some context for the piece that you made for this show?
Hi, I'm Kelly. My pronouns are she, her. I am a knitter primarily. That's kind of where I started. I was taught really young, as my grandma taught me, and then I've kind of developed a craft in my adult life. And I feel like I'm still kind of new to like presenting my craft as art, and so I embodied materials has been a really great vessel for that, and like all of the lovely like community everyone else has been talking about. And I am really focused on like wearable art garments, I would say, because I think that there's something really intimate about taking this thing I do at home and like with people I care really deeply about, and then like putting them on my body and then like wearing them out in the world. But then also knowing that like they are, like they're art pieces that like I am very skilled in and, like mean a lot to me. And so the pieces I have put out for this show are one of them are kind of like all of my little gauge swatches and like little yarn bits from projects I've done over the last 10 years, roughly. And I kind of submitted it incomplete just as an ode to like the ever, changing nature of my craft. And I feel like that speaks a lot to what we talked about this year in the group. We talked a lot about like being incomplete and like constantly changing and like constantly learning. So that is that one. And then the other sweater vest I submitted is something from my archive that I just feel like is kind of to reference to what Drew said, is kind of just an ode to like queer joy and like, just like fun gender expression. And then also just in a fun wearable art garment. And so yeah, that's my little spiel. I know it's not anything crazy, but I just love wearing fun little pieces and making them with my friends. So yeah.
That's very sweet, Kelly. Thank you. Maybe Jessica, you could share next, please.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica. My pronouns are she, her. Let's see. I am a interdisciplinary artist, I would call myself. I'm trained as a photographer. I was painting for a long time before I came to fibers. And right now I am primarily working with fibers and domestic materials specifically. So things like dish towels, bed sheets, clothing, found quilts, anything that has lived a life in the domestic space. I'm really interested in kind of pulling that apart and looking at what really lives there, how it's connected to identity, what it can reveal about my own self and how I've been formed by the domestic space and the kind of the social conditioning that those things hold. So I can talk more about that with the pieces I have in the show. But I, the one that I made for this show is a quilt that is kind of made from a shirt. And so I was really thinking about what we wear as identity and gender, and specifically the dimension that can hold. And yeah, I can talk more about that as we dig into the text and how that inspired the work here. But out in the world, I am an elementary art teacher. I teach full-time at a public elementary school, K-5 art. And I'm also a single parent to two kiddos. And yeah, this is my third year with Embodied Material. I've really loved being a part of this group. And yeah, I'm excited for this show and our work to continue. Thanks there.
Thank you. Heather, take it away, please.
All right. I'm Heather, they, them pronouns. I am an electrician in the world, among other things. But that's something that I have been doing since pandemic times. And I used to say that, well, I still say sometimes that it's the closest thing to weaving where I don't have to justify being paid. But it's still very systems oriented and very hands-on, small, and also very abstract and mysterious. So I'm a weaver also. I sent 3 different pieces to the show at Praxis. 2 of them are from an older body of work called Queer Encrypted Weavings. And I'll talk more about those later, but they felt like they belonged in this show alongside this text. And then the third piece I embroidered into a weaving that I had made previously to say I am home. And I think we'll talk about this later as well, but this text was harder for me to connect to. And the work is like less directly connected. But like maybe the juiciness, as there has been saying, is like you get juicy when you get sort of like a little untethered. And so, I mean, I think I was thinking about public and private spaces, and the book was from 2014, and that was like a particularly unrooted year in my life. And I feel like it's only in the last 8 years where I've come to some sense of belonging. So kind of like thinking about, you know, time time passing over the last 11 years since this text came to be. So yeah.
Thank you, Heather.
Mhm.
Riley, would you please share with us who you are?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Riley. I use they, them pronouns. I am a hand spinner and weaver. So I kind of come to my art practice very firmly rooted in craft and textile traditions. I find myself often teaching and doing a lot of work in artist and community-led settings, whether that's for the last year's embodied material or 2 years ago, I created a kind of interactive installation with a series of 100 felted pins based on the idea of pronoun pins and invited the audience to draw from the aesthetics of the hand spun and hand woven material to create their own titles for them based off of gender feelings that the pins evoked. I My piece for this year's embodied material was a woven piece inspired by the tension between hand spun yarn and novelty yarn, both as kind of aberrations from what people in certain circles of the craft world would consider good or proper yarn to use. And so by holding different tensions between the two of them, I sought to kind of um, think deeper about the way that the author of our text writes about community versus individual and the construction of individual identity coming at the expense of collective and communal identities.
Very cool, Riley. Thank you. Um, do we have Arne? Is Arne in the chat yet? I don't think so. Um, if anyone sees Arne pop in, maybe just raise a hand or let me know. I would love to give Arne a moment to introduce himself. Another brilliant artist in this cohort who does lots of different kinds of textile explorations, is a very curious person, very smart person. So as soon as Arne is in the chat, let's make sure to just dedicate a little moment to celebrate them specifically. Thank you for the introductions. All extremely cool, interesting things that we're already talking about. I can't wait to dig in. Before we do, I'll just name the text that some of these artists are talking about. The book that they read this year, Decolonizing Trans/Gender 101 by binaohan. And this is a text that it really digs into, as the title suggests, the way that gender as we know it here in America in the West, or even sort of somewhat globally at this point, is pretty has been pretty steeped in colonizer brain, colonizer mindset, very deeply rooted in kind of white supremacist ideals, having this very binary gender, gender as a sort of public facing force. All of these things that we sort of understand about um, gender as we know it in this moment. So not really anything to do with textiles quite so much, where in past years, some of the texts perhaps had to do with art theory or textile theory, with some elements of gender, some elements of these broader topics of humanity that impact how we live and how we make art. This year, it was really, as Heather was sort of mentioning, a little more disconnected. So just to give you a contextual frame, that's kind of where we're starting with this text and how it reflects against these pieces that our artists are talking about. I think the first question that I want to ask, um, and a couple of you touched on this, but I'd love to hear from a couple more people, is about this concept that I just sort of laid out a tiny bit of, the colonizer thinking. This book really talks a lot about, and Riley kind of touched on it just a moment ago too, about identity and individualism, how that sort of um, is almost a Western or heteronormative ideal in itself, this idea of the individual as opposed to I am a member of a community or I am woven into the tapestry of a community. I'm just curious about, as y'all were reading this text and reading about this sort of concept of the colonizer mindset, how were those concepts impacting your work, whether directly or indirectly? Heather mentioned it was pretty, maybe indirect. It kind of had some porousness, but it wasn't quite a one-to-one. I'm curious to hear some other folks talk about how did this text and these concepts impact the work you made for this piece or this project? Um, Maybe I'll just call on someone unless anyone feels called to share right away. Maybe Drew. Could I call on Drew? I'm in teacher mode.
Sure. Yeah, I think that something that resonated me with me in the text was beyond there was like this dichotomy between public and private, and then there was also the idea that there are only like I think there's literally a quote in the text that says there are only two kinds of human beings, white men and white women, and the way that the gender binary was really constructed as a tool of whiteness and a tool of categorizing people. And I think as a non-binary person, obviously I was relating to that. And then also as a disabled person, I was relating to the public and private atmosphere of things. And like in the way that with things like the ugly laws and things with like mask bans, there are people who get to exist in public and there are people who have to exist in private. So people who are institutionalized, people who are not made to feel safe in public spaces. And I think I'm definitely thinking about that a lot recently as like an immunocompromised person, as somebody who's taking COVID very seriously still. What does it mean to exist in public? Um, and what does it mean to do that as a trans person? Um, yeah, and how does whiteness play into it too? I think that was something that we all had to keep coming back to because we are a majority white group. Um, and B wrote this text, I think, talking specifically to other Indigenous Black people of color. And so kind of candidly talking, it wasn't necessarily meant for us. So I think we also had to kind of dissect um, and drift through any sort of discomfort we had with the text too.
Totally. I think that's really valuable, especially because I think there is also a recorded um, habit that white people have um, when they have other identity markers of sort of hiding behind those or being able to hide behind those and say, I don't have to be accountable to my role in white supremacy because I'm trans, I'm neurodivergent, there's a luxury to the other identities that we hold. And I think that's like, part of I'm sort of spinning out from a comment that Riley shared earlier about the individual versus the community and how those can be sometimes at the expense of the other. Um, and just thinking about how there are ways to avoid that accountability if you do have these other kind of identities as Western culture asks us to think about our identity as something wholly individual and wholly kind of separate from everything else. And it allows us to use it as a tool to sort of block ourselves from being able to or being willing to account for anything else. So yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, Drew, that was part of the reading. I'm curious if anybody else heard anything that Drew just shared and felt a little spark of um, recognition or resonance and wanted to add anything to that.
Well, this kind of ties in to your question there as well. Um, but Drew, hearing you speak, like I'm remembering from maybe it was the first or second meeting that we had discussing this book. We were talking about some of the different like common pillars of white supremacy, And one of those that shows up a lot is like black and white thinking of like, this always happens, this never happens, like just things being like thought in a very binary manner. And that is something that um thinking specifically about the piece I made, like I always have like this is my like finished work where this is something that's finished, this is something that's going up on a wall. And then I have things that are like for classes and demos and when I'm teaching someone how to do something or when I'm just in my sketchbook or things that don't have that pressure of this is the final A art. Um, that I've actually noticed I enjoy making so much more. And a lot of times those are things that I'm making in community with other people, but like because like a quilt has many hands and many people are involved in making it, it's viewed less as like this is the individual artist who gets all the credit, who made this work all alone. Um, and that um yeah, thinking a lot about like who gets to be an artist and like how sometimes what society perceives as being an artist can reinforce that black and white thinking and also reinforce individualism culture. But for my piece specifically, like I have a very robust sketchbook practice, so whenever I make a textile book, it feels like a very loving way to like bridge that gap of like it doesn't have to be a capital A art piece. It can be something that someone gets to intimately flip through and have um also a way that like, you know, you're not supposed to touch art when you're in a gallery, but very much being like you get to interact with this in a very human way. So
Mm,
um maybe more the materiality in that for me.
yeah. I'm curious to hear more about materialities from some of the other artists too, specifically with this intimacy element that Soph just brought up and the sort of the touching of it. I heard a few of you, several of you in your intros saying like talking about garments and textile itself or fabric even as having, well, even the title of this project, Embodied Material, implies that the material you're using has some like spirit to it or something more than the object that it is. It has almost a soul, maybe, is the implication. Um, I'm curious if people could just share a little bit about your relationship to textiles or garments with that lens. Is there something about textile as an art form that allows people to sort of engage with it on those terms?
I had thoughts before Fair asked that really lovely question, but I feel like that's a really like great segue into what I was thinking. Um, just kind of like what Soph was saying about just like the little things being the things that you end up enjoying almost more, or like that's where I really find that my practice thrives. I feel like my piece I have also kind of presented like a diary in a way. I even kind of named it like incomplete diary from these years. And I feel like that's a really fun metaphor between Soph's book and this garment because I feel like I used to be a really big writer when I was in college, and so like to have these pieces that like I feel like I spend all this time working on, and then to be able to see how they've evolved over the years, and like have had like I've had to have the patience to collect all of these different little squares of things. And if you're a knitter, you know, I feel like the dreaded gauge swatch is something that people are just like, oh, you gauge swatch, like that's crazy. And like as I've gotten like more involved in my practice, like I really do understand the importance of them, and so they have kind of become these really special things to me. And so then to like put them all together into a garment feels really metaphorical just for I feel like where I am in the world and for my queerness. But then also what they was talking about with garments, I feel like textiles are really important to me in like decolonizing and like decapitalizing my mindset, because once I started to learn how to make garments and like how to take this thing that my grandma taught me when I was a young girl and turn it into something that like I can use to clothe myself and others, and I have now understand like I understand that like I am the person and the textile is the thing I wear on myself, to like adorn myself instead of something that I have to fit myself into, has really done wonders for me. And just like understanding beauty standards, understanding my relations to other people, understanding like I don't need to buy these things, like I can fix my things, I can make something new, I can unravel something and start over. And so the collection of garment swatches and little other things is just kind of my ode to like clothing myself is an act of radical hope, and like I'm not gonna just like put whatever on. I'm gonna like craft beautiful garments and share that skill with others. I think that's really important to me too. When I wear something I've made and then I tell somebody else like you can do this too, like the light in their eyes is so exciting to me, because I'm like we don't have to do that. And so textiles feels like the gateway for me to talk to other people about bigger things because we all use them.
Absolutely. Yes, I was just thinking about that, especially with like, I think that knowledge that you're speaking to, Kelly, especially like this knowledge your grandmother shared with you, um, is sort of ever expandingly applicable to the world around you, because I'm sure you've had this experience. I've had this experience. I'm sure all the textile artists in this room have had this experience. You make a garment for the first time and you go, that took me so long. How could it ever be possible that the equivalent of this is $10 at Target? Now I'm thinking about why is that true? I'm doing research about why is that true? And it is the unfortunate fact that if something is cheap, it's because somebody didn't get paid for it. And so then you're sort of this knowledge that your grandmother handed you, which was click, 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 becomes I'm so much more connected to the world around me in such a meaningful way and in a way that can really change things. I think that's such a brilliant way to look at garments and garment making. I'm curious, maybe Jessica, we haven't heard from you in a minute. Do you have any thoughts about just how this concept of decolonizing your mind impacted your work at all throughout this process?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. Let's see. First, I just want to say kind of my relationship with textiles and my work, and thinking about the materials I'm using as elements of the domestic space that really shape me as a person, shapes the world that I know. Um, and I use a lot of botanical metaphors in my work. I use a lot of root systems, and then also a lot of um, anatomical metaphors as well. So intestines and umbilical cords, and kind of merging those two metaphors together. And so these domestic materials really represent kind of the groundwater that a plant is intaking, and kind of blurring the lines between what is external and what is internal, which really connects to the text in terms of the discussion around public versus private, and really blurring those lines between is anything truly private, is anything truly public, where is that boundary, because we're all drinking the same groundwater, and things that are outside of me I drink in all the time, and that helps kind of create me as I know me. And that includes white supremacy, that includes how I know my own whiteness, how I know my own gender created by that whiteness. And so I'm really fascinated in blurring the lines between external and internal. And I think that is speaking pretty loudly in the two pieces that I have in this show.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jessica. I would love, I've heard this phrase at least 5 times now, private versus public. So I feel like let's transition into that and hear from some folks about it. When we were prepping for this discussion, we sort of talked about that too in that moment. And the group was just sharing how they were very struck by some passages in the text, in a chapter that was about coming out, like coming out publicly to people. about sort of the difference and connection between how you feel about yourself in the privacy of your own identity and home and how you present publicly or how society shapes your identity. So I'm hearing, yeah, I think I heard Heather say it, I heard Jessica say it, I heard Drew say it, public versus private. Let's get into it. Let's talk about what we were thinking about when as that phrase is like pinging around. Maybe Heather, do you want to start us off if you have any thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, there's a piece of mine on the screen right now that is queer encrypted weaving. And so what's going on in this piece is I lovingly call it my sparkle tarp. It has a panel in the center that is an overshot section of overshot weaving that is coded with a story sent to me. And so you have a lot, like textiles give you so much information. You like they sometimes speak to sort of a utility. This one has grommets along its edges, and it really does kind of look kind of like a tarp, except that it's made out of holographic purling ribbon. But you don't have access to the story that's embedded in it. You would have to go and get the code and decrypt it to understand it. And so in that way, that story is still owned by its author. And they did share other pieces of their biography and things that were important to them. And so those elements are what informs the aesthetics of this piece. And so that's one place I would start to talk about private versus public. And I mean, there's so many layers to that. One of the things that the author talks about in the book is the ways that especially BIPOC have elements of their identity. It's not just individual identity. It's a larger meaning inside of their inside of the people that they belong to that is stripped away and erased inside of our society. And the public versus private identities that we all carry that are visible on different levels or totally invisible as well. So that's where I would start us.
Totally. I want to just pause because I think Arne is here. Question mark? Arne, are you in the chat?
I'm here.
You're here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Arne, would you mind introducing yourself? Just name and pronouns. Tell us like who you are out in the world, what you get up to in your day, and then a little bit of context about the piece that you made for the show.
Okay, yeah. Hi, sorry everyone. I was late. I am home, so I was just spending time with my family. Uh, how Merritt just introduced me. Arne. Sounds like Arnold and Renee put together. They, she, they pronouns. I did the two crochet pieces, filet crochet pieces. And then I'm an art teacher for the next month or so until, layoffs. And then that's up in the air, but I'm an artist. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Arne.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just jumping back to where Heather kind of gave us a little launch pad. I'm curious to hear now. Maybe Riley, do you want to respond to anything that Heather shared about public versus private, or any way that those concepts impacted what you brought to the show?
Yeah, definitely. Kind of also coming at the idea of public versus private through working through weaving and kind of like Heather alluded to, weaving is inherently a coded practice in that threads are either up above another set of threads or below threads in their interlacement. And kind of the legibility of these kinds of weaving drafts that are the patterns that create weaving. Um, there's something that I find really captivating in, as a textile artist, being able to then look at fabric and identify here's what it is, and kind of being on the inner ring of that scope or of that kind of coded language is something that I find really fascinating. And then having that knowledge is in and of itself a literacy that is learned through interactions with others, kind of like how Kelly mentioned, learning how to knit through other people. Like nobody creates a new identity out of thin air, and no one learns a new textile craft out of thin air. It's all gained and shared through community, and we have our own spaces for that. Yeah, I guess it doesn't quite get to the public and private of it, but that's what's been simmering for me these last few go arounds.
Cool. That's very cool. I think there are elements of it in there for sure. Um, I want to open it to anybody else in the group who might have thoughts about public versus private, because I know a few of you named it. I think maybe Drew also named that concept. Drew, if you want to share anything about that.
Yeah, I think to bring it back to the text, that chapter where they talked about coming out, something that was mentioned that was that in some indigenous cultures, trans people had very public communal roles. They had like roles in religion. They were like spiritual roles, and part of what colonization did was strip those roles and force them into a binary gender. And then we have the process of coming out, which is much more like a Western idea. You know, these people who were in these public roles and doing this like culturally valued thing, they didn't have this like shameful like coming out that they have to like grapple with. And so I think t thinking about how that's something that has been invented by colonization and upheld by white supremacy, and the ways in which, you know, every queer person here probably has their own coming out story and their own feelings about it. And you know, we come out privately, we come out publicly, we come out again and again our whole lives. Um, so I think there's that. And then I think, yeah, talking about public versus private, for me, my mind always goes to disability. Um, because I think when you are a disabled person, you exist in private a lot. And when you are in public, your body's not yours. You're being gawked at, or you're at a doctor and you're a subject to be poked at. And so, yeah, I think those are where my mind's
Mm,
tingling about.
totally. Yeah, I think all of these reflections are just reminding me too that I think it goes in the other way too, because I experience like, in my own home, in my own body, I'm a queer trans man. But at the grocery store, if I'm in just kind of a regular jeans and t-shirt kind of moment and I'm not really clocky, to a person of color, I'm a white man, and that's it. There's none of my other identifiers come with me there, which means that I do need to be responsible for and accountable to the space that I take up in that moment and just be mindful and caring about it too. So it's like it really can, the way that society perceives us, it's really worthy, I think, to just be accountable to it because it is, I think, maybe even more important than the way we just feel about ourselves on the inside, because we are relational creatures most of all, I think. Um, yeah, just jumping off of what Drew said too, as maybe a newer topic, and a reminder to everybody listening to this talk, if you have questions too or thoughts you want to share, feel free to type them into the chat and I can bring them to the group. So don't be shy. We want to hear what you're all thinking too. But what Drew was just talking about, I'd love to just jump into that a little bit. This very Western idea that you have to come out, or it's noble to come out, or it's morally good to come out. And, this idea that if a celebrity comes out kind of late in life, there's a little bit of judgment about why didn't you do it sooner? It could have helped so many people. And there's all these narratives around like what coming out does. Um, and I'm just curious about, uh, if anybody was feeling or thinking through that concept of being public with your identity as sort of a noble or morally good or right thing. Um, I think we haven't heard from Soph in a minute and Arne, but maybe Soph could share.
Yeah, I gotta chew on that a little bit more, but Drew, hearing you talk, when we were in conversation with the public versus private throughout our meetings, we brought it back to Johanna Hedva's Sick Woman Theory, which is a text that you brought to the group in a previous exhibition, and is a text that has really stuck with me. Where the artist discusses, they open the text describing that if they, as an immunocompromised person, wants to go to a protest, to publicly participate with their values and within community to show solidarity for folks, that is something that there's all these different factors of that they have to consider and will likely not be able to show up to a protest. And that kind of opens the rest of the essay of being like, who gets to share their values in a public space. And that feels in the Venn diagram of what you're saying with like the morality of what you share within your identity in a public space as well. Um, Maybe someone can piggyback. That's just like the text that's
Yeah,
feeling called to me in this moment.
totally.
I can jump in.
Jump in.
Yeah. I think really the heart of the public versus private topic, and specifically the act of coming out and the morality attached to that in our culture is all tied to safety. And where do you feel safe? Is that with community? Is that with family? Is that within yourself? Where do you find safety? And that changes all the time throughout our days, throughout who we're with. And there, like Drew said, there's not one time a queer person comes out and then it's over. It's a much more fluid experience. And I think there's a lot of white supremacy within queer communities who, whenever there's judgment around why didn't you identify yourself or identify your partner or come out in some way to whatever situation you're in. And I think there's a lot more nuance to this, specifically when we're talking about people of color and the communities that they're coming from, the families they're coming from, and what might be at stake as far as safety goes in coming out versus not coming out, or where do I come out and where do I not. I think our discussions on this topic really opened up a lot of dimensions of what does coming out even mean. And I don't know. As a group, we had a lot of questioning around this topic. And I thought it was a really healthy discussion, full of a lot of compassion and curiosity about different possibilities that we haven't really considered.
It feels like in real time that black and white thinking sort of dissolving a little bit. It feels like that's kind of what happened in this group this year. That's very cool.
Yeah.
Could I piggybacking off of that?
Of course.
Kind of as you were talking about in the discussions about like what the author means by coming out. What do any of us mean by coming out? I was doing a little bit of digging into the history because obviously, every queer person may or may not have many dozens of coming out stories of their own, whether that's to themselves, to family, in the workplace again, at a third workplace because you're working as an independent contractor. But in terms of the conceptual framework of being in the closet or out, that also ties in so directly to the collective and the idea of safety, where the push for people to be out publicly comes from the late 70s and people fighting against a initiative that would have been banning any LGBT people from any kind of public service, especially from working as teachers in the state of California. And so that being a push wasn't just telling people come out just for the fun of it because you morally owe this to others. It was a call on people who did have the protection to be known as, okay, yeah, it's my gay coworker, in order to help garner more public support from regular straight and cis coworkers and family members and other churchgoers to help to protect the rights of LGBT people who maybe didn't have the safety to be publicly out in the towns that they were living in.
Cool. Thank you for that. Very cool context, Riley. That's that's really brilliant. Um, Arne, I want to just check in with you about this concept of public versus private. I'm curious if that ever made its way into your thinking or your art, or the piece that you brought to this project, this idea of public versus private.
Um, yeah, I think so. What really stuck with me was when the author started to list all the different labels for themselves. And I can't remember all the labels, but some of the labels were specifically only for their culture. And I feel like, especially with TikTok and, the internet is a big, small place. We are sharing different cultures. And a lot of times people hear a word and they're like, oh, okay, well, that resonates with me. Let me start using it. And it's like, well, this word is very specific to a certain culture. Maybe find one that fits your culture. And I think that's kind of the public versus private I really connected with. Um, what else was I gonna say? Yeah, I think when it comes to coming out, do I talk about it with my family? No. It's not I wouldn't say it's an unsafe. I guess it's more like, and I guess it's also from a place of privilege. Um, what's the point, maybe, is where I'm kind of at right now. Because I'm still gonna do what I'm doing, and
Yeah,
I don't know. That's still in a gray area right now. But that's
totally.
when I was creating my pieces, those were the feelings and thoughts that were coming up.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's super. I this is like totally an aside, but I fully support you in that, Arne, because I totally feel what you're saying. I feel like I think there is some of that black and white thinking that comes into this idea of coming out, because coming out as the Western idea that we have about it makes the implication that my personal life is the business of everybody else, including my family, even though my relationship to my parents is not dependent on my sexuality. My relationship to my parents almost includes very little of my sexuality or my gender at all. So I totally hear you, Arne. And I think when I think about all these public versus private things and the sort of morality myth of coming out, I think about whose business is it, really? I think there's something beautiful about not assimilating and something beautiful about being loud and proud. There's also something beautiful about letting it be a sacred and tender thing that might not apply to every relationship in your life. Um, I'm feeling compelled to bring in a question from a participant, a listener here. Eliana asks, I'm curious about private versus public in relation to process specifically. So they're talking about brainstorming with others, sharing technical challenges, sharing progress photos. They follow up by saying, are you alone most of the time that you're working on a piece, or do you do it in company? Do you bring works in progress with you? How do these factors influence you? So just thinking about the materiality and making of something like this, how does public versus private come into your artistic making process?
I have some, I feel like, immediate thoughts to that. I that are leaving me right now. I feel like as I'm saying this. But they're coming back. Sorry. I feel like I share a lot of my work like on the internet. That's kind of been where I've learned like after I was a small child, like my grandma taught me. But then from there on out, like as an adult, like YouTube and Instagram and social media has been pretty much the driving force in how I've learned and honestly how I got connected to this group. And then on the flip side of that, I feel like there is all of this like discourse on the internet all the time about like who owns what or whose idea this was first. And for me, my process, I in this public versus private lens, I struggle just because it is intimate and it is sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't really always want to share all of my art. Like it is so much my soul. But on the other hand, like people sharing their art is the only reason I know how to do this. And then also like the whole pointing fingers about like you stole my idea or you stole my idea, like that really bothers me because I'm like, you guys, like that feels like the white supremacy and being like you own this technique that like is like for me it's a lot of like text designs and knitwear or different images and knitwear people are always pointing fingers and I'm like guys, you understand that these stitches have existed for thousands of years and like somebody has made this before just by like chance and probability and to claim grand ownership over this is silly in my opinion. So I think about that, but then at the same time because we're kind of taught to have this scarcity mindset, like sometimes I do want to like hold my things close to me and then I do get defensive, but again, I always just remind myself, I come back to the like, if people didn't share their process on the internet or like with each other, I would not be here where I am as a fiber artist or as a person. And so I I dance with that a lot, I think, in my process.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Kelly. I want to just share a comment that Emily, someone in the chat, sent to us, just as a response to something that Drew and Riley were saying. Um, if people who do not get invisibilized did the labor of centering and making space for those who are invisibilized, marginalized people wouldn't feel the burden of having to come out for visibility. So I think just saying this thing that Riley was talking about the teachers in the 70s, the folks who are maybe more easily able to just sort of come out and it's also I think something Drew was speaking to as well, and me in my own life, the reason why I wear a mask out in the world is because I don't really need to, but it makes it easier for my friends who do need to or do need me to access that when they need it, and it's not quite as big of a deal. And so having those teachers who were like, "Oh yeah, I'm gay, yeah, I'm coming out," making it a little easier for the folks who are really not able to do that or don't have access to that. There is that solidarity piece of it too. Thank you, Emily, for sharing that comment. Um, uh, I want to talk a little bit about something that the group shared with me as we were prepping for this talk. Many of them commented that the format of this book itself, and that the author even named that they contradict themselves very regularly in this piece, and that it was written pretty poetically. It was very imaginative and had really creative connections that were not very like highly academic or very like bound by a grid. It was a little more free flowing. So I'm curious, it sounded like this impacted all of you. I'm curious about how you as artists, how does it feel to contradict yourself in your art or to be fluid? or to sort of reject the idea that you're an expert? How does it feel to just move through a piece, maybe with that intuition, instead of sort of technique or academia or any of these things? Maybe some folks could share about that.
Yeah, I can go. I think that what I was most excited about in this text is that all of the footnotes were these little conversations between the author and one of the author's friends. So in a lot of the footnotes, this friend would be like, I totally hear you on this, or this is either bringing up another point or sharing another experience, or um, it gave way to having, you could see their intimate banter within the text. And one thing that I really appreciate about this group is that even if we're, looping in Eliana's question as well, like in this group, we are not like having shared studio time together. We're not making this work side by side, but we often get to either talk about the work that we're making, and have it come up as it comes up. In a group chat, sometimes we'll send little um, texts of like, what material do you think this is? This is how much I have done on this piece so far, and that we also all each get to make at our own pace. Non-urgency, another great way to unlearn white supremacist thinking. But to have space looping back to having space to contradict yourself, I think that I initially studied sculpture in undergrad, and then outside of school, I was like, how the heck am I going to have access to a wood studio or a metal studio or a ceramic studio when I don't currently have access to those things? And that I had learned how to sew when I was younger, but learning to like create the ideas in my head was something that I feel like I really had to learn by doing, and that's something that like giving myself the space to like try and then fail and then calling myself a textile artist at the same time like feels like maybe kind of a slanted contradiction where it's like not untrue, but it's something that um like I get to kind of take it as it comes.
Hmm. That's beautiful. I didn't know that about you, Soph. That's cool. Um, Arne, would you mind sharing a little bit about this topic? I'm curious, just to remind you of the question, curious if during this project you felt any um, intuitiveness or fluidity or any moments where you felt like you were contradicting yourself, or how did your process go through that lens?
Yeah. Yeah. So, most of my work, well, no, it either falls into two categories. I've been thinking about it for 2 years or 3 years, or I'm like, it's like a lightning bolt, and so I just do it. This one happened to be a lightning bolt, which I was like, oh, awesome. Um, and I'm trying to think if I did share it with I think I had mentioned an outside reading source that was an inspiration that not it, I didn't I don't think I ever shared the reading source, but after reading what the author had said about like different labels, it reminded me of this other reading source, and so I was like, yeah, let me just do something inspired by that. And then also I grew up crocheting, but then I guess to also like connect to what Soph was saying, I went to the traditional route. I learned drawing, photography, printmaking, all that stuff. And then I went to grad school, and I didn't have readily like access to any of those things. And it was frustrating. And also just uh, I just I didn't want to do anything many of those things. So I'm like, what's the first art form I learned? And it was crochet and cross stitch. And so I did a crochet project. But with this one, with filet crochet, it's it's very grid-like. I've been inspired to. I was listening to another artist, and she was basically saying like, uh, be inspired or don't be afraid of the grid, because I think a lot of times with modern art or whatnot, we look at the grid as, I think it might fall into like a craft versus high fine art type of thing. And so with filet crochet, it's very rigid in some ways, but then the material I'm using is soft. And um, also, I was looking at when you pulled up my picture, it's sometimes hard to read. I realize that too. Like when you're really close to the image, you can't really see it, but it's easier to read it when you're far away. But I know it's kind of small. Um, I hope I'm answering the question. uh,
Yes,
okay.
absolutely.
But yeah, I also look at these projects as I when I was going through school, I was very frustrated with the idea of you always have to submit to shows. But now that I am consistently co- committing to shows, it's like a snowball. So this project is leading to another project,
Mm.
um and I think maybe that's why this project came so quickly, because I had already been practicing with this group to, sometimes it is a last minute type of thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. I guess also to circle back to what Soph said and what we've been saying, like that's kind of pushing back against the white supremacist idea of like time management. That's something I talk with my kids a lot, or my students a lot, is time management. And yeah, sometimes things are last minute, and they're messy, and they don't look right, and you just got to submit it.
Yeah.
You just got to go with it.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that. Just to jump off a little bit of like, I'm hearing you, Arne, talk about like just the group itself and what it brings to you. I'd love to kind of go through and maybe hear from everybody about what does this project, what does embodied material give to you? What does it bring to you? Maybe we could just, I'd love to be a little indulgent and hear from everybody about what do you get out of this project this year and in previous years if you've participated in multiple years. Maybe we could start with Riley.
Yeah, so this is my third iteration with the group, and just through the different seasons of, starting with, oh my goodness, spring 2023 felt like we were one of the first groups to like really start feeling in-person book club after so much Zoom time. Through then, getting through 2024, and then this year was our first year where we were really doing almost all of our meetings like completely online, which was great because I've been out of Minneapolis since September at a residency up in Grand Marais, Minnesota, about 5 hours away. So yeah, just having continual uh, dialogue with the same and ever shifting group of people through so many different seasons and so many different years has been really nurturing, especially kind of, I'm sure a lot of other artists can relate to the feeling of leaving college, leaving a supportive studio environment, and then all of a sudden being alone and working with whatever materials they can fit inside of a household environment. So kind of having the access and space and community to work through some readings. This is, our first year working through an entire book too, which has been a different experience versus going through some like very theory heavy, academic and textile heavy years of readings. Has been just a really great evolution.
Cool. Heather, how about you?
It is my third year as well, and I just was reflecting on how different like each year has been. Like the first year was very compact, compressed. We met like every week or something like that for a month or 5 weeks, and then we had a show like 3 weeks later. So it was just like, boom, here we go. And then the following year was more like we take the academic year and have a show the following summer. And so, and that year we were everybody was bringing different texts. And then this year reading the single book together. And sending our work to a place where we can't actually go in person to see it. But it is kind of delightful to get images of the show. And like, yes, thank you to Jessica and everyone at Praxis for hanging it so beautifully. And also thank you to Soph for so much legwork that you do year after year that you have done to kind of keep this project rolling and keep something on the horizon for all of us to participate in. I think I have really, it doesn't really matter if I love a particular book, an essay, or something that we're reading together. I'm usually glad that I have read it, and it's because we have read some pretty academic things together. A lot of them are things that I wouldn't have read on my own. And if I had read them on my own, my brain would not have like digested them the same way that it does when we are in conversation with each other. And so I appreciate that. And I feel like when I talk about this group in the world, the little tagline is sort of like, oh yeah, my queer theory reading group for textile artists. And it's just like, it's people are like, oh, that's very specific. I'm like, it is. But there's something really beautiful in how we all come into this to talk about these different texts with a kind of like embodied knowledge. All of us are working in different ways, but we all are really like using our hands and engaged in touch and engaged in time in a way that like if you're not in this world, you don't necessarily have access to. So I think that's what I would say.
Wonderful. Jessica, how about you?
Yeah. This is also my third year, and let's see. I think that first year, I'll back up a little bit. I went through a pretty life-changing divorce in 2021, and my fiber practice was really kind of my way through that time. And it started as a very, I guess, private practice. I was really just alone in my house sewing up a storm, trying to get through that time. And the first embodied material year just happened at a time where I was really kind of coming out of that cocoon and really seeking community. And so I got so much out of kind of finding my people and really connecting on things that I couldn't talk talk about to a lot of the other people in my life. Because as Heather said, this is a very specific topic. And I just found so much deep love for the other artists in the room and the kind of the momentum that gave me in the studio and kind of exploring a lot of the concepts that I needed to explore at that time. My process is very connected to self-exploration. So having this group kind of through that time of reinventing myself in my new life has been really invaluable. And it has really helped shape kind of what my practice looks like coming out of that time. And I'm a person who really
does well with deadlines of, okay, read this by this date. We're going to discuss it as a group. I would not have read a lot of what we've read just on my own. Reading is a very difficult thing for me. I have ADHD, and getting through a text alone is a really daunting task. So having the structure of this community has really been really helpful. Not just enjoying each other's company, but kind of exploring these concepts that I wouldn't have otherwise done by myself.
Ellie, how about you?
I think I this is my second year, so I did join a year in. But just as everyone else has said, I would not really have read the texts we have read without this group. So that has been really exciting. Because just like Jessica, I feel like I need deadlines and a little bit of soft social pressure to like, get things done. And I feel like in the best way possible, this group is that. I feel like both years, both exhibitions I participated in, both of these ideas were kind of, I think Arne mentioned it. I either also have lightning bolts or ideas that take me forever that I've had that I've been sitting on. And both of these projects were, I think, ideas that I've been sitting on for some time. And this group really just gave me the inspiration and the like gentle kick in the butt I feel like I needed to get these ideas out into the world. And it's just this group just provides a lot of really comforting community. Like everyone else said, it's very niche, and so it's fun to be around other like-minded people. And I also think it's just beautiful how our work always speaks to each other, even though we don't really work on these things together. I think that that is really powerful as well, to just know that like we're all doing our own thing, but they all go together. So yeah.
Yeah, the conversations really do just, I think, just you're all thinking and talking and chewing on all the same things. So of course, your work is in conversation with one another. Drew, how about you?
Yeah, I would echo what a lot of people have said. I think kind of the nice, like soft accountability of having a group where you're reading stuff with other people, um, has been nice. And like, I think for me, oftentimes when I'm making art, and especially since I left college, I am like, oh my gosh, I love painting. I love embroidery. It's so fun. And I forget about the juiciness of like reading theory and how much that can inform my practice and how much that can inspire thoughts and how much reading and writing can really enrich an arts practice. And so I feel like this group has been a nice way through a queer and trans lens to help hold ourselves accountable to that. And it's also been a really exciting way to kind of explore a different aspect of curation. Part of my practice is as a curator. I've done some other like solo curatorial projects, but I feel like talking with Soph about how they curated the first show and then like talking as a group when it comes up to like the last two shows about what decisions we want to make, I think is really exciting and titillating. Um, and I think, yeah, I've kept readings that we've done for through all the years. I've been part through the 3 years with me, and one that like echoes in my mind that I keep dear to me is Audre Lorde's The Uses of the Erotic as Power. Um, and the quote I actually from there is what I used to inspire my piece for this show. I'm just going to read it real quick. Beyond the superficial, the considered phrase, "it feels right to me," acknowledges the strength of the erotic into a true knowledge. For what that means is the first and most powerful guiding light towards any understanding. An understanding is a handmaiden which can only wait upon or clarify that knowledge deeply born. The erotic is a nurturer of all our deepest knowledge. And so thinking about like euphoria or erotic in terms of queerness,
Mm.
um, and that it feels right to me feeling, I feel like embodied material has been a space where we can all get together and be like, it feels right. And
Mm.
let's go to this deepest part of ourselves and consider that while making our art practice.
Beautiful. Arne, how about you? What do you get out of this project, out of embodied material?
Yeah, this is my third year as well. I feel like I get the like my ideas aren't crazy. They're not out there. I remember I had brought an idea to a painter, and no offense to this painter, but the look she just gave me after I explained it was, I don't get it. And it was it's one of those long-term projects. It's gonna get made. Um, but it was me trying to figure out how to make bags or something like that. But then whenever I bring ideas, and they're not even full ideas. They're really just half-baked, like little bits of ideas. Whenever I brought it to the group, I haven't been y'all get it. Y'all get that it's a process, but it's not. It's with fiber arts, and
Mm.
yeah, that's been the most helpful. And then also just a lot of people have said like the soft deadlines, because sometimes I like deadlines, and other times don't don't do that. Don't give me a deadline.
Mhm. That's great. I want to end with Soph. I want to hear from you. Uh, Folks in the room. Soph is sort of the originator of this group, and the gentle leader and guiding hand for all of this. So I want to end with Soph. What do you get out of this project?
Um, First off, thank you, Drew, for sharing Audre Lorde's reading of her essay in the chat. Hearing her speak those words is really beautiful. If you haven't heard her read that essay out loud, check it out. Um, yeah, similarly, stewarding this project has filled me with a lot of gratitude. Um, I think that every year with the people in this group, I feel like I get to work through ideas of like where where is my theory, where are my values, and how am I practicing those? Like how am I bridging that middle space? And I think that my art practice is me investigating how I bridge that middle space. Um, it's so exciting that even though this is a very niche study of the world of like queer and often trans theory and then textile theory, a lot of us make in very different ways. I am not a proficient weaver. I have never spun my own yarn. I've never done filet crochet, though I have seen the trends. It's cool. So at the same time that I get to be filled with like geeking out over this theory that I'm really excited to be like, oh, this is like clicking so hard in my brain right now, and I get to share that clicky feeling with other people. At the same time that that's happening, I'm learning things that I didn't know about how other things are made. Um, so it's like a really beautiful balance of like getting to be like really, really nichely zeroed in focus while still expanding my understanding of things. And yeah, I think as the steward or organizer of this project, I think that it's also um yeah, given me a lot of like I want to do right by the people in this project, and like I feel invested in the people that I'm in relationships with, being able to continue to show their work and continue to talk about their work, and continue to get to talk to them about their work. And wow, I had another thought and maybe it's gone. I think how people have mentioned that it's different every year. I feel really grateful that, I get to come to this with some humility and being like, we're all figuring out together. We get to try things together. we get to honor our capacity year by year, but still be in community and still show work.
That's beautiful. Um, Before we all sign off, I'm so grateful to everyone for being in this chat. I just want to hear from Soph and maybe the gallery as well. For folks who are able to go see the show in person, how can they do so? For folks who are probably, I'm seeing a lot of Minnesota names in the chat. For folks who can't see the show, is there a way they can interact with images or this incredible gallery booklet? Maybe Soph, you could just give us a quick little rundown about, is there a way that we can interact with the work that has been spoken about so lovingly today?
Yeah, at some point in the future, near future, I will be sharing these images on my website and some more of them on social media. I know that Jessica shared that this panel will also be shared on the Praxis Gallery website, so I'll let her speak a little bit more about that.
Sorry, I'm here. Thank you, everybody, so much. Just wanted to say it was really inspiring, and you have a lot of support from a community in Cleveland. And anytime anyone wants to come to visit Praxis, whether the show is up or not, we'd love to have you. And I hope that this continues to deepen the relationship between Minneapolis and Cleveland. And we're gonna we could also probably post the slideshow that I've been kind of sort of casually flipping through, both on our social media pages and on our website, as well as the recording of this talk. So if anybody you know would be interested, please share it with them, and I'll make sure to email it to you, so you can share it with everyone. So.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you so much to all of the artists. Thank you, everyone who came to hear this talk. I really encourage you to research these artists who have all been so generous in sharing what they're up to. They all have brilliant bodies of work outside of this project, and I really recommend that you check them out. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night. If you're
Go,
in
everyone. Have a
Minnesota,
great
stay
night.
safe. Be safe, be well.